have for the homework gotten Git and GitHub working together, so you can check out a project, make changes to. Well, what did you do? You forked a project on GitHub, so it was on your account. You then checked it out, so it was you had it on your local machine. You made some change to it, committed those changes, and pushed the results back up. Right? That was the. So now everybody has that working. So having said all that, let's talk briefly here. So difference between, so this was for the quiz. Difference between Git and GitHub. Git is the local repository where all changes you make and commit to your code are kept. GitHub is a remote storage area for Git repositories that makes it easy to share Git repos with other people. Something along those lines. So that Git is the actual tool. Git is what creates the repositories, keeps track of all your changes, all that jazz, and that lives locally on your computer. GitHub is a external remote storage location for your Git repositories, so you can share it with people. Make sense? So something in that that ballpark was the for the quiz. Okay, so let's see. So last time we just introduced just basically the tool, Android Studio, right? And introduced Git and GitHub. Okay, where's this one? Okay, this is up. This is grabbing it from the desktop, so as if I had checked out the project and then checked it back in, right? So let's just, as a review then, I'm going to go ahead and close this. That way I can give you a new template for the homework assignment. So I'll create a brand new template that will check into GitHub and all that stuff. So I'm going to start a new Android project. And we're going to call this guy CSC250. This should be homework 12 template, all right? Homework 12 template. And I'm storing it inside of my Dropbox folder for CSC250. That way it stores in my cloud. By the way, I'll give another pitch for that type of thing. Whether you're storing it, whether you're using Dropbox or Microsoft's OneDrive or Google Drive, doesn't really matter. I'm not a big fan of Google Drive because it seems to not deal with certain file names correctly. I don't know if that is the case with OneDrive or not. I use Dropbox. So Dropbox, I've never had a problem with it treating a certain file name kind of incorrectly. So use the one that you're most comfortable with. It doesn't necessarily matter, but definitely use some sort of cloud storage like that. It's a no-brainer. We recently had a student who, well, at least they claimed that that they lost eight weeks worth of work on a project because it was only stored on a jump drive and something got corrupt with it or something like that. If you use one of these tools like Dropbox or OneDrive, any work you do on your computer, just always work out of that directory, and it will automatically back it up for you. You don't have to do anything else. The fact that I'm storing this in my Dropbox folder means that it will always be backed up because Dropbox is installed on my machine and it constantly updates to the cloud any changes I make. Instant backup, you don't have to worry about it. And Dropbox gives you 2 gigabytes for free, so it doesn't cost you anything. And you can have multiple ones on your machine. So I have OneDrive and I have Dropbox on here. But in any case, I use OneDrive because I'm on Android now, so iCloud is a thing of the past for me, I guess. But in any case, I encourage you to get Dropbox for maybe all your programming stuff. You have 2 gigabytes, you can store a whole lot of crap on there unless you're working on Unity projects, which then get pretty big pretty quick. But in any case, you could put a zillion Android projects on there before you run out of space. Highly encourage you to do that. Okay, so in any case, I'm going to be putting this in my Dropbox folder. Go ahead and hit next, and we'll go ahead and just choose the 4.03 like we did last time. So I'll just leave that as the default. Hit next. I like to always start with empty activities, and we're actually do something with the activity today, so we'll see that. So hit next, and you can go ahead and name your first activity main activity if you want. That's the default. That's pretty much standard. If you have a very specific application you're writing and you want to have a different name for your main screen, go have at it, but we'll just call it main activity. So I'll go ahead and hit finish. Now, while this is loading, somebody remind me, what is MVC? Model view controller. Okay, what's it for? What kind of animal is it for bonus points? What kind of thing is MVC?
Basically a model view that basically separate your code and your activity and stuff, and mechanism to connect them together.
Okay. Yeah, so the type of guy MVC is something called the design pattern, right? So design patterns are a proposed good solution to common problems. MVC, as you pointed out, that proposed good solution is that it's a good idea to keep your code in one place and your design in another place. That's what's meaningful to us right now. The third thing to that is also your data in another place. So keep the different components of your application in separate places, and then have some sort of interesting way of linking them together. Okay, that's what MVC says. And again, MVC is not an implementation. It's an idea. It's a suggestion. Okay, it says come up with an implementation that supports that idea of keeping your stuff separate, yet giving some way of connecting them together. Make sense? All right, so that's what model view controller is. And then we're going to see today, we didn't actually look at how Android accomplishes that last time, right? We talked about MVC, but we didn't actually make the connection. Okay, so we'll see how Android implements MVC today. Okay. Now, I think that in general, things like MVC or things like design patterns, I don't necessarily know if these things are all that globally important. I think we could all, you don't have to necessarily remember that phrase design pattern. Know of it, kind of have an idea of what it is. This kind of falls into that category. If you remember back from I think we did it early on in 200 where we had made a list of like buzzwords and what they mean. Did we do that in your 200 class?
We did it here, right?
Huh? Yeah, so well, no, what I had you do is I had you make a list of a whole bunch of buzzwords. It was like a paper. It was like the first assignment or the second assignment or something like that, I thought, in 200. Well, regardless, one thing we run into in technology is people like to come up with complex sounding cool buzzwords that mean easy things. And then when you're in a conversation with some techno geek, they try to make themselves sound smarter than you by just throwing around buzzwords like they're nothing, right? And then you kind of feel like an idiot because you don't know all these different buzzwords and what they mean, but they actually mean simple stuff that you do understand. You just haven't heard that one weird buzzword. Or it's kind of similar to when people use acronyms that, like TTYL, something like that in chat, talk to you later, that kind of stuff. That if you haven't heard of the certain thing, I had a friend one time who basically shorthanded everything, things that were not common. Pick a sentence, just pick the first letter of every word in the sentence, and he would just write that. Like, you don't know what that means? So in any case, I think having a knowledge of some buzzwords is important. I'm not sure how important design pattern is in that thing, but MVC is definitely important. design patterns are a dime a dozen. There's zillions of them, and only a handful of them are actually important things. So we've talked about MVC. We're going to see it in action today. Another one we're going to talk about pretty soon is something called a singleton. That's another popular one. Outside of that, we have the observer design pattern, which is another popular one. Beyond that, there aren't a whole lot of design patterns that are like common things that people will drop on you. Okay, but having that vocabulary of buzzwords is going to be important for keeping up with those people that try to impress you with buzzwords. All right, so when your project first gets created, it looks like something like this. So right off the bat, notice it's opened up two tabs here. We have our main activity.java. So that is my logic, that's my code, okay? Then we have our activity main XML. This guy right here. Here, let me turn off the front light. You'll be able to see some of this text a little bit better. Okay, so this activity main thing, this is our interface. Okay, this is what our interface looks like. This is our logic behind the interface. So this is starting to look like MVC, right? We're keeping these things in separate places, but we haven't seen where they're connected yet. So just as a quick starting point, I'm going to go ahead and hit play just to make sure our emulator is working. It's going to pop up. I'm going to use this pixel with API 23, so that's newer than our code is designed for, but that's okay, because newer devices can run older code. You just can't go the other direction. If you hadn't previously picked something, you can do create new virtual device. You can pick something from here. I picked the pixel and just hit next. Otherwise, you can pick any of these other ones, but I already had created the pixel, so I'll go ahead and launch on this. And I'm going to hit this little checkbox that says use same selection for future launches. I'll use the pixel for a while. So hit OK. So now it's going to launch the emulator. And depending on your computer, this could take anywhere from 30 seconds up to 3 or 4 minutes. And the default guy here should give us a little hello world program. All right, so there's our hello world for our base Android app. So this is proving it's working. Okay, so now let's go and start breaking these things down. So let's look here and what I talked about last time. We talked about MVC. So we talked about Android Studio. We talked about design patterns. We talked about MVC. We said they're not implementations. How are Android apps organized? They're organized as a collection of activities as opposed to iOS apps that are collections of view controllers. Think of those guys as being basically the same thing. So once you learn Android programming, moving over to iOS programming is not a giant leap. What's an activity? It's a single screen in our app, and activities have life cycles. So there's multiple points in time where we can talk to an activity. We can interject something in our activity. And the first one that's already available to us is called onCreate. So when an activity is first born, onCreate gets called one time. So we can think of that kind of like our constructors. Okay, that's our opportunity to initialize some stuff when an activity is first launched. Okay, then we have this thing called the R class that's automatically generated for us by Android. Well, Android Studio, I guess, but the Android SDK generates this guy. So the R class helps us. So we're starting to see some of the inner workings now of how MVC is accomplished in Android. So this R class keeps a collection of all of the widgets we have on our screens, all of the layouts we have, so that we can reference those things from within our class or within our project. We talked about Git and GitHub. Okay, so coming back here, again, I always like to use, and let me move this over here. I always like to use the this keyword. So I'm saying this particular activity needs to set his content view. So his content view is the dude we see when it launches. So this is one step of MVC. So this guy is how Android implements MVC. So this line right here lets this activity know which XML layout it should show. So this is connecting your interface to your logic. All right, so we're saying this, and this guy is an instance of app_compat activity, which is an activity. I want you to set your content view, that is the screen that the people will see. I want you to set it equal to this activity main file. Notice that was the guy that was generated for us. And that guy is going to live inside of the R class, inside of something called layout. What do you think layout is, just by looking at it here? I've mentioned that there's a class that exists called R. So what kind of animal is layout? Just by looking at how we're using it here. You said it's an instance? All right, so you think it's a field. Okay, how do you know it's a field? As opposed, what else could it be other than a field? It could be a method. How do you know this guy's a field and not a method? Okay, no, wrong direction. Go a different direction. Go ahead.
There's no parenthetical notation.
Parenthetical notation. That is like the creepiest way you could say that. Which I'll give you bonus points for, but that's, I mean, I'm a little uncomfortable. So, no parentheses, right? Parenthetical notation? Where did you come up with that? I mean, it's accurate, but
I don't know.
I mean, that's bothersome, right? Yeah, so we don't like it. All right, so no parentheses at the end of this guy, right? All right, so probably a field. So in any case, now, Charlie back there, just because he was trying to help us understand some stuff, gave an incorrect answer. Said this guy is an instance, right? So tell me why you're wrong.
Yeah, because it doesn't have that.
Now, that's how we know it's a field. No parentheses because, so we know that dude right there is a field. Now we want to know what kind of field is it. Is it an instance field or is it a class field? Well, he mentioned it's an instance field, but it's not. It's a class field. How do we know this guy's a class field? How are we calling it? By R. And first of all, I've advertised that R is the name of a class. Even if I hadn't done that, we can make a pretty good guess and say R is the name of a class because it's capitalized, right? So we have the name of a class calling something. And if we're calling something using the name of the class, that means the thing we're calling must be a class member. So now we got to figure out what kind of class member is it. It's either a field, a method, or a constructor. Now, constructors are always called after the new keyword, so we can kind of cross that off our list, right? So now we know it's either a field or a method. And because we are lacking the parenthetical notation, oh, so good. No parentheses at the end of this guy, so it would be a method if it looked like that, right? But because we have no parentheses, this guy, we can cross off the list the possibility that it's a method. Therefore, the only thing we have left is it's a field. So it's a field. Specifically, it's a class field because the way we're calling it is using the name of the class. Make sense? So this is right there, right back to the last question on the midterm. How do we identify these things? Super, 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 super important. Understanding this stuff clearly just unlocks the entire language to you. All right, so if this isn't completely straight in your head, which it seems like we're not quite there yet, it needs to get there. All right, so we'll keep drilling it until you like act bored. You know, when I ask the question, is this a class? then I'll stop bugging you about it. All right, so this generated R class must have some sort of, think of it almost like a folder, but some sort of object field that's in it that holds collections of our layouts. The reality is this guy is actually an integer. So there's a unique identifier for each of our XML documents. It just automatically says the first XML thing, maybe it's number 1, then 2, then 3, almost like a unique memory address. All right, so this R class keeps a list of the different layouts that we're going to have, because we don't want to necessarily have to remember that, oh, well, the layout that we want to set up for this content view should be layout 117. That's not friendly to a human, right? We'd rather say, oh, it's the layout I made for activity main, and let that guy behind the scenes get mapped to layout 117 or something like that. All right, so we like this kind of notation where we have a name for it. And that guy corresponds to the activity main that was generated for us. All right, and I'm going to do this here. And that should allow me to make that a little bit bigger. Yeah, gotta go with that. Okay, so I'm saying this activity set your content view, that is the dude that we see on the screen, equal to this layout file. So now we can go in here and modify our layout file. So we're seeing MVC in action here. So right here we have this thing's called a text view. I'm just going to click on it, and I can either double click here if I want to change the text, and notice it highlights this guy here. So when I clicked on this guy, it went ahead and showed me this. This is like a simplified properties window. Kind of shows you the properties that you might often use. And then you can click on View All Properties, and it shows, you know, a lot more properties that are in there. I'll view fewer properties because this is going to be good enough for us most times. Now, let me show you this other view here. Take away that. And I'm going to hit this drop down here. So for our editor, I want it to show me what it would look like on the device I'm kind of designing for. It doesn't matter because we're going to design this to look good on most devices, but just so it matches up to our emulator. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to choose the pixel. So not a whole lot's changed, and I'll just zoom back in a little bit. All right, so we can see a little bit more of that guy. And then I want to get one more screen showing up down here. There should be a thing. Oh, it's already here. Sorry, it just, I moved it when I minimized my project here. So that's my own fault. So notice here that this guy, let me show you a couple different things here. What we are looking at is the visual representation of our app. This is good. If we can spend most of our time here, we're going to be happy. In the early days of Android development, we could not do that. This editor did not work that well. We had to spend a lot of time. If you click, so notice we have a tab here, design, and then text. When you click on text, you get this, the XML, what's behind the scenes of this layout. So what kind of language is XML? Markup data representation language is how I usually advertise these guys. It's not a programming language, it's a data representation language. Why is it not a programming language? What does something need to have in order to be a programming language? Well, no, we have interpreted languages, so it doesn't have to be compiled. We have three things that all programming languages have. They go back to how human beings solve problems. So all programming languages, you need to be able to create variables, somehow, named memory. You need to be able to ask questions, and you need to be able to do repetition. Now, we might not be experts in XML here, but I'm promising you that you can't create variables, can't ask questions, and you can't do repetition. So you don't fulfill any of the requirements of being a programming language, where a programming language needs to fulfill all of those requirements. Okay? So this guy, as he pointed out, is a markup language. It's adding additional meaning to the text that's actually here. If you look at this, there's a whole bunch of fluff that's here. But really, the only thing that's meaningful to us is the fact that I have a text view and it says hello world on it. Those are the two pieces of information that are actually meaningful to us. The rest of this stuff talks about, okay, how wide is it? How tall is it? We have these constraint things in here, which I'm going to take out. That actually has most to do with the fact that adding constraints to, let me kind of flip back here to design. My guess is that this constraint layout is probably the new preferred way of making your layouts in Android. We're going to be making some fairly simple things in here. On the iPhone side, we have something called AutoLayout. See, we didn't used to have this problem. Where I mentioned that this has gotten significantly better than it used to be. The Android visual editor was complete garbage before. And part of the reason for that isn't so much that the tool sucked. I mean, the tool was young, so it was still kind of evolving. But it wasn't that it just innately sucked. It was that fragmentation problem of the Android ecosystem, where you have, how many, I'll ask again, how many of you in here are Android users? Okay, almost half the class is an Android user. Do you think we probably across those, so we had like 6 people, let's say, do we probably have 3 or 4, maybe even 5 different phones with slightly different screen sizes, different pixel densities, all different aspects, different specifications to that device? Well, each one of those then is going to have a different way of laying things out. Even if it's slightly different, it's going to be different. Make sense? So the idea of this whole constraint layout type thing is saying, well, I want this label to be relative to this label or something like that, offset from it. I don't have any experience using the constraint layout. It's probably not a big deal to use, but because we're going to be building some pretty simple layouts in here, I'm going to be showing you kind of a historical way of doing this, which is still going to be used often today because it's an easy way of implementing it. But so we're not going to get into the constraint stuff, but I'm almost positive that that's probably the way that they want to lay out different aspects of a screen now. But what I'm going to show you is still going to be viable for what you do today. So they've given us this base thing called a constraint layout here. So the top of our component tree is our constraint layout. Everything lives inside of that. If I look at the text, notice here at the very top, we have our constraint layout. And all these things here, that's a child inside of that constraint layout. So I'm going to come back out here to the design, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of that text view. Just highlight it and press delete. And now I'm not going to actually get rid of the constraint layout. It's not hurting anything, but I'm going to put new layouts inside of here. So up top here, under our palette, I'm going to click on layouts. And the layouts that we're going to be very interested in are going to be our linear layouts, horizontal and vertical. So a horizontal linear layout, even though they have the pictures drawn wrong, is that so difficult to get right? So the question is, are the pictures wrong or are the words wrong? I guess we'll find out in a second. So I'm going to create a vertical linear layout first. And the way a vertical linear layout works is anything I throw in here will stack up on top of each other vertically, automatically. If I put 3 text views in here, which are effectively labels, every one I drop in there will just put right on top of each other. So it kind of automatically organizes your stuff. Horizontal ones, we'll put it right next to each other. Make sense? And you can put horizontal linear layouts inside of vertical linear layouts to almost create a kind of a grid type of thing. So we'll mess with that today. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to attempt to create a vertical linear layout. So you can drag it out here to the screen directly, or you can drag it into your layout here. Doesn't necessarily matter. Certain things you'll find it's no big deal just to drag out here. I'll do it. That's fine. And it happened to be vertical, so the words are correct. The picture is wrong. So notice over here I currently have it selected, so it's showing me the properties, the simple properties for it. And notice its orientation is vertical. So the difference between these two, a horizontal and a vertical one, is this one drop box. So if I want to convert this guy back to horizontal or to horizontal, I just do that. Make sense? And now he plays by the horizontal rules instead of the vertical rules. Now, for layout width and layout height, when you're using these things, you typically do not want to have, so this is doing a specific number of pixels. These are dynamic pixels. I think that's what the D stands for, but regardless, because different phones have different resolutions. So you usually want to do something relative to the width of the screen. So I'm going to hit the drop down here. I'm going to say the width. I want the width to go ahead and match the parent. Did I select match parent? Oh, that's interesting. So it's dynamically doing it. I did select match parent. I'm selecting match parent there. How's it showing up in here? Well, I kind of hate that, but that's okay. I think that's because we're putting it inside of the constraint thing. So this will update based on what the constraints are. So don't worry about that too much right now. It's not going to hurt anything. All right, so I have a vertical linear layout in here right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you how stuff works in there. So I'm going to go to my widgets, and let's just grab a couple of buttons. So I'll throw a button in here. I'll throw another button in here. I'll throw another button in here. Notice how it's just putting them on top of each other. That's the organization of a vertical linear layout. I'll go back to layouts. I'll throw a horizontal linear layout in here. So now I have a horizontal one. I'll go back to widgets. I'll throw some buttons in there. I need to get those last two buttons. So here's an example of I had trouble getting, I wanted these two buttons to be inside this horizontal one, but when I drug it out here, it kept going into the vertical. So now I can manipulate them over here. I can say I want it inside of the horizontal linear layout. Now it puts them next to each other. Make sense? So this allows you to kind of build an interface. So I'm going to delete a bunch of this stuff just for the moment. So I'm going to get rid of those three buttons, and I'm going to get rid of those two buttons. So now I have a vertical linear layout. And actually, I'll get rid of the horizontal one for right now. Just to kind of show how all this works, kind of finish filling in the blanks for MVC. What we want to be able to do is we want to be able to read in some information from the user and then spit information back out, right? And maybe react to a button press. So type in LOL, hit a button, have LOL show up on a label, something like that. That would kind of show us kind of the workflow. So let's start off by getting some text showing up on a label first. So we'll just start off simple. So our labels in here are called text views. So in Android, what we would call a label that's not editable text, that's just, like hello world was inside of a text view. So I'm going to go ahead and take my text view, I'll just drag it out there. All right, now let's say I want that text to be centered. So I have some options for centering the text. Right now, this text view just says text view on it. I can make it say something else. So I'll go ahead and double click on this guy. And let's change it to hello world. And I'm also going to change his ID. So up here, this guy is like a generic ID it assigned. Well, this is a text view that I'm going to want to update from code. We're going to start seeing how MVC connects. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to call this guy my label. Okay? Call it my label. Now, I want this guy to, let me look at, so text, we can actually go in and we can drop down and I can say I want this guy to be centered. All right, so that's one way we can pull it off, but I'm actually going to show you a different way of centering it that will be knowledge that will be helpful for all sorts of widgets. Okay? So I'm going to, because I almost guarantee what's happening behind the scenes here is different than just centering it. So I'm going to go to say view all properties. So let me actually add something to our list here. So we have a collection of things called views. All right. Well, actually, let's start off with this. So we have view groups. View groups, these are our layouts. So layouts are collections of views. So these are the components that make up our interfaces. So inside of view group, we are going to have a collection of views. Now, what's a view? A view is anything we see. That's what a view is. On iPhone, it's called a UI view. Okay? And on iPhone, we don't have a we don't distinguish between a view group and a view. A view group holds a view can hold multiple views. So a view group in Android is the same thing as a view in iOS, and a view in Android is the same thing as a view in iOS. So iOS just kind of gives double purpose to the view. So a view is anything we see. Specifically, now I'm just going to add, we saw it has a whole bunch of properties. So these guys have a bunch of properties. And over time, you're going to learn more and more of these properties. But a property that we're going to look at right now is one of the properties called gravity. So what I want you to think of, every single view that we have, think of it as like a little container. Okay? And we can set the gravity for this container. So if I want so by default, maybe the gravity is upper left. So up and left. So that means anything I drop into that container, for instance, text, something like that, would suck up to the upper left-hand corner. But if I want it to be center gravity, which means that anything I throw in this box gets sucked to the center of it, I have like my own gravitational field inside of that container, inside of that view. What I would do is I would change the gravity for this guy. So we'll come out here. And I've already clicked on show more stuff. And I'm going to scroll down to gravity. So here's gravity. And I'm going to go ahead and notice there's a bunch of things in gravity. So there's a top, bottom, left, right. So if I choose right, I wanted that guy to suck to the right. So not updating in there. Well, it looks like they take out gravity for text views. So I'm on my label, just a text view. Here's gravity. I have it centered right now. I want it to be right, but I expected this text to move. You said it worked on yours?
Yeah.
Well, let me set it to right here, and let's go ahead and run it and see if it updates when I run it. It should have updated in here. It did not. Let's look at the text here. The gravity is set to right for that guy. Historically, that would have worked. And center would have sucked it to the middle here. Wonder why it's working on yours. Are you running an older version of Android Studio?
Actually running 3.0. The new one.
Oh, here. I have some IDE errors. Let's just close that. Let me kill Android Studio and just relaunch it. I mean, we can do the text layout thing, but I want to show you this gravity thing because it's something that works on all. Like if we want the text on a button to move in different places, we would set the gravity component of it. I guess that's possible. There's a bug, and the update will fix this. So I'll go to View All Properties. I'll go down to Gravity. Let's make it right again. No, not changing it for me. Oh well, we'll show it at on a different example.
Wait, go to the XML.
Well, should I set the gravity again?
No. So I'm getting an error in my XML that text alignment and gravity aren't in sync. So red squiggle under text alignment.
Oh, so text alignment. Oh, it must be because I clicked text alignment first.
Right.
So when I clicked text alignment, I broke the ability to use gravity. You didn't do the text alignment first. Okay. So now that guy should be happy. And now I should be able to go to gravity. And I should be able to click right, and he sucks to the right. Yeah, so as soon as I click text alignment, I added that XML field, which overrides gravity, apparently. All right, so it doesn't matter which of the two you use. There might be a performance difference between them, but this gave me the opportunity to show you how gravity works in general, because our entire interface is made up of views, and every single view has gravity. And that gravity works as a box with its own gravitational field. So you can set the gravity for that box to whatever you want, and then things that live inside of that, like text and that kind of stuff, or images, would move around based on what you have the gravity set as. Okay? So I'm just going to center it here. That way it'll be right there in the middle. And we'll go ahead and launch this guy, and we'll still see hello world. It's showing that I already have a connected device. I'll say use selected for the future. I don't know why it asked me this again, probably because I just relaunched Android Studio. So it will, because I already had the emulator launched, it'll launch my program on the emulator that was already open instead of launching a new one. So there's my hello world centered there and stuff like that. Now, it would be nice to be able to programmatically change hello world to some other string. Okay, but that's going to require some MVC stuff. I'm going to need to be able to access that interface element from within my logic portion of my code. All right, so we need to go back here. We got to remember that when I clicked on this, I'm going to go ahead and show fewer properties just so it's simplified. I named this guy MyLabel. Okay. And this guy is of type TextView. That's the kind of animal that guy is. That's the kind of object he is. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my main activity, my code now. And inside of onCreate, I want to go ahead and give myself access to that TextView. So I'm going to say TextView, and I'll go ahead and call it MyLabel. Now, it wants to import TextView, so you can highlight over this guy. Well, let's see, is there a way to highlight? Usually I just hit Option Enter, and then it so here's that guy. So if you just slow down and do it, it'll give you the way to import it there directly. Otherwise, if you type it too fast, you could hit Alt-Enter on the PC or Option-Enter on the Mac. So we're going to call this guy TextView. We're going to name him MyLabel, just because that happens to match up to the name, what we named him. You don't have to name him. This is just a variable name, so you don't have to name him the same thing. So we're going to say MyLabel is equal to, I'm going to say we want the TextView version of something. And you're going to see what I mean by that in a second. Now, we're going to have this activity go and search for a view that lives within him with a certain name. So I'm going to say this dot FindViewByID. Notice that this guy takes an int as a parameter. And the ID I'm going to look for is r.id.myLabel. So we mentioned earlier that the R class automatically updates. We created a widget of type TextView named myLabel. The R class automatically added the identifier for that guy, which boils down to an integer. Notice it says int over here. It's a little behind the light bulb, but it's there. So this is the unique identifier for that particular widget that lives in my interface. So I want to say, activity, go and find the view associated with this identifier. Now, because activities hold, well, layouts hold collections of views, when we say find view by ID, this guy is going to return for us a generic view. Well, I don't want a generic view here. I want what he actually is. I know that this guy's actually a text view. He's a specialized version of a view. So if we look at how Android would organize this, just like how we would think about it in normal Java, we have a collection of objects through the inheritance model. So we have this thing called a view. And then off of view, we have a whole bunch of specialized types of views. So we might have text view. We might have another kind called edit text. So on and so forth. So when I say this.findViewByID, he's going to get me something that's labeled as a view. But I happen to know that the ID of the dude, myLabel, is actually one of these animals. Okay? So I'll go ahead and typecast it to a text view because that's what he actually is. That way, when I use myLabel to access elements of that guy, access properties of him, I get the properties that, I get all the properties that are available to any view, and then I also get the properties that are specifically available to text views. So I'll go ahead and say myLabel dot set text to LOL. So I'll go ahead and set the text in that label to LOL. So when this activity is created, so on create, we go ahead and tell our parent to call his on create and do whatever magic the app compat activity does for setting up a app compat activity. Then we'll do some additional setup ourselves where we'll go ahead and say, I want my content view to look like this dude, look like my activity main layout. Then we're doing some additional setup. I'm going to say, I want to go ahead and grab one of my widgets on the screen. So through MVC, I'm going to create a variable called myLabel, and here's the MVC magic over here. So I'm going to ask my activity to search within himself for the view called myLabel and bring me a connection to it. And then I'll go ahead and set the text programmatically to LOL. So I'm not going to go back to my interface at all. The interface says hello world, but when this launches now, it's going to say LOL. Okay, and it didn't say LOL after it showed up on the screen. It was already LOL when it appeared on the screen. Okay, because we did this at the time when the activity was born, way before it appeared on the screen. So you might think ahead and think, well, what are some other, we mentioned this idea of an activity life cycle. What are some other moments in time where we might want to interject stuff into our mobile applications? Well, perhaps when an activity actually shows up on the screen, maybe when it's about to show up on the screen, maybe when it leaves the screen we want to do something, stuff like that. Those are different moments in time. So maybe when an activity actually shows up on the screen, we want to start some animation. Maybe when it leaves a screen, we want to stop that animation so it's not draining battery power or doing any extra work when it doesn't need to. That kind of stuff. Make sense? But right now we're not looking at the other things, but you just kind of thinking ahead, that's how it works. So before this guy ever showed up on the screen, we had already switched that label to LOL. Cool? All right, so now let's go ahead and let's actually have this text change as a result of clicking a button. So instead of it just automatically happening, let's go have our app launched by saying hello world, then click a button that says that when we respond to that button press, it changes the text to LOL. So we'll go ahead and I'm going to create a function here. So again, this is another example of MVC. So this is MVC, linking interface widget to local variable. I'm going to create a public function here, and we're going to call this guy, we can name him whatever we want. Okay, I'm going to call it on change button pressed. So we want this method to get called upon on change button pressed. I'm specifically naming it on here at the beginning because that tends to follow a naming convention for mobile application stuff. Really almost any event-driven graphical user interface stuff, it follows this pattern. So this would be kind of an event responder. On this event, do something. So on change button pressed, and this guy's going to take in a view as a parameter. Why is my control enter? Yeah, but there, I mean, I usually use the shortcut thing, and I'm wondering if I'm here, and have to type it in a second time. Well, I'll try it the next time. Then it automatically updates it. But it used to work where if you type in view and then press space, and it's already up here. So let's remove it from here. Notice it's saying press something here. So I press Option Enter. It's not what I was expecting. So Command Enter, Control Enter. I really thought that's what I thought it was Option Enter. Well, whatever. So just go back, backspace 1, press enter, it'll show you the options, pick view. And you can name the view whatever you want. I'm going to call it view V. Now it's very important, oh, and this guy needs to be a void. So similar to public static void main, which is the method we're used to on the standard Java side, this method needs to look exactly like this with two exceptions. You can name the method whatever you want to call it, and you can name this variable whatever you want to call it, but it must be one variable and it must be a view. Okay, this will flag this guy as how it exposes itself to our interface designer. So this is MVC expose this function to the interface builder. And what is V in here? V will be the widget that calls this function upon being clicked. So you can have one function that's attached to 10 different buttons. And depending on which button you clicked on, V would be a different object. So V is our way of knowing who clicked me. You might not need that, but it needs to be there. You might not care who clicked me. In this case, we have one button on our interface. We know who clicked it, right? We're not going to use the variable V. When the button calls this guy, we know which button clicked it. We're not going to do anything different based on which button clicked us. So we'll ignore the existence of V, but it still needs to be there. All right, and that's what that variable V is. But instead, what we're going to do in here, I'm just going to move this code. we're going to go ahead and grab our text view and then set the text to LOL. So rather than doing that on create, we're going to do that when that button is pressed. Okay, so now we've written this logic to expose this to our interface builder, but now we need to go back over to our layout and drop a button in and let that button know that he should call this function when he's clicked. Okay, so we're going to go into activity main. And we currently have we have a vertical linear layout. So what I'm going to do is, well, we'll just drop the button into our vertical linear layout. So we'll just go below it. I'll double click on the button to change the text on it. We'll just say click me. So that button's going to say click me on it. Now, notice we have for the button, we have a function, a property called onClick. And in this dropdown should be, and this is sometimes a little buggier, historically it's been. Lately it seems to be working every time. When you hit this dropdown, notice it sees our onChange button pressed. Because we exposed it to this guy because we wrote it the right way. Has to be public, has to be void, has to take a view as a parameter. The name of the function and the value for the parameter name for the view doesn't matter, but it needs to follow those other rules. So now he's available here, so we're going to select him as what we want to do when this button is clicked. Make sense? All right, so now we'll go ahead and run this guy. So that's MVC in action, where we've connected that logic to this interface. When it launches now, notice it says hello world. When I hit click me, it now says LOL. It calls my function. Make sense? Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's add a way for us to type something in. So rather than it always say LOL, we want it to say, we want us to be able to type something in and then click the button and have the label update to whatever we typed in. Make sense? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get a text widget. We're going to call it plain text. Let's drop it in here. And I'm just going to reorder it a little bit. I'll put it above the button. Actually, let's put it above the label too. So we'll have the edit text at the very top. So we'll click on that. We'll type some stuff in. We'll hit click me, and then the label will show whatever's in here. All right. So let's call our edit text. We'll call it our input ET. Input edit text. So that'll be the name of the variable for that guy. All right, and for input type, I'm just going to choose, so this is the keyboard that it should give you for it, a specialized keyboard. So I'm just going to choose, we're going to import some text. All right, that's what we're going to put in. Now we can throw a hint in here. So we'll call it enter some text. That's something else I don't want to talk about yet. Enter something. Okay, so our hint is going to say enter something. And I'm going to go ahead and take the text that's defaulted in there out. And notice now it says enter something. So that hint will go away as soon as you tap on it because it's just telling you the type of information you should be putting in there. Now, I want this enter something to be centered. How do I do that? Gravity. Or you can do text alignment. But we're going to do gravity because that's what the cool kids do without touching text alignment first. So we'll go down to gravity and we'll choose center. And now our hint and any text we put in there will become centered on there as well. So practicing with gravity. All right. Click on view fewer properties. Again, this guy's name is input ET. So now what I want to do is when I click the click me button, I want to get the text from this, this widget and set the text for this widget. Okay, and this guy's type, if you click on this, his type is edit text. So we'll go into activity main. I'll go ahead and get my edit text. So I'll say edit text input ET is equal to the edit text version of this dot FindViewByID r.id.input ET. And then the text is going to be input ET dot get text. Now notice that get text is something called type editable. So I actually need to get his toString in order to get the string version of that. And we know what toString does, right? ToString is what gets called when we do system.out.println, right? That function. So we're saying, give me the string representation of this editable text. So now we'll set our labels text to whatever our inputs text currently has in it. Go ahead and hit play. So right now, it still says hello world because that was the default. If I hit click me, it's going to turn to nothing because there's nothing currently in my edit text. If I change my edit text to LOL and I hit click me, now the label gets set to LOL. If I change it to world and I hit click me, it'll get changed to world. So now we have a functional interface. That make sense? Okay, so now we got to think about what are the things that we can do with this. So what we want to do for our homework, and rather than giving you a starting point for this, I want you to be able to set this stuff up yourself. So I'm going to actually have you practice it. I'll put this up as a, actually putting it up is not going to necessarily help you. Well, I'll put it up just so you have it, but I encourage you to not cut and paste from here. Okay, that way you can get used to writing the function yourself for the future. So I'll go ahead and share this. I'll import into version control. I'll share a project on GitHub. I got to put in my local password. We're going to call it homework 12 template. Let's click share. Here's all the stuff. Click OK. All right, so what you're going to do for homework, and I'll go ahead and type it in. So this is homework 12, right? So we're going to create an Android project with 2 edit text boxes, 1 button, and 1 text view. When the button is clicked, you should reverse both strings from the edit text boxes and then concatenate them together and show the result in the text view. Make sense? So 2 edit texts, you hit the button. So if you type in LOL, well, LOL will be a bad example. So for example, if edit text 1 was world, edit text 2 was hello, your text view would ultimately equal DL ROWOLLEH. Each of those, so this guy reversed and this guy reversed, concatenated together. Make sense? So throwing a little bit of logic into this and then some practice of what we did today. And I'll give you a link to our project here. So here's our homework 12 template. So you can use this for reference, but I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you not to copy from it. So I'll call this the example. And then here's the repository. All right, and this will be due on Thursday, 10 a.m. And you should submit your self-evaluation as well as a GitHub link for me to look at. Okay? I will see everybody on Thursday. Don't forget today's student, faculty, staff Bible study. God and Grub. Just go to the cafeteria, sign in, grab a tray. Doesn't cost you anything. Take your tray down to the terrace room for Bible study. It's from noon to 1.